Action Jackson by Jan Greenberg and Sandra Jordan, illustrated by Robert Andrew Parker. On a late spring morning, the American artist Jackson Pollock began work on the canvas that would ultimately come to be known as Number 1 1950, Lavender Mist. Award-winning authors Jan Greenberg and Sandra Jordan used this moment as a departure point for a unique picture book about a great painter and the way in which he worked. The lyrical text drawn from Pollock's own comments and those made by members of his media circle is perfectly complemented by vibrant watercolors by Robert Andrew Parker that honor the spirit of the artist without imitating his paintings. A photographic reproduction of the finished painting, a short biography, a bibliography, and a detailed list of notes and sources that are fascinating reading in their own right make this an authoritative as well as a beautiful book for readers of all ages. Some of this account is imagined. We don't know if the sequence of events during the months of May and June 1950, when Jackson Pollock painted Lavender Mist, was exactly as we have described it. But we do have many first-hand reports about the summer when he made so many of his great paintings, his life in springs, the way he dressed, the way he talked and walked, and most important, the way he painted. And on those we have based our story. In the afternoon, Jackson Pollock puts on his paint-splattered boots and walks across the yard. The wind blows in from Gardener's Bay, bringing the scent of salt marshes and sea lavender. His eyes miss nothing. Sunlight on the tree branches, tangled stalks of blackberry bushes, beetles crawling in the grass underfoot. Caw-Caw, the crow he tamed, flies down and lands on his shoulder. His border collie Jip runs in circles demanding a walk across the fields and down a country road to the wide, sandy beach. But Jackson turns and keeps going. The gray, weathered barn used to be filled with rusted machinery, old fishing gear, and broken tools. Now it's his art studio, a place for painting. Some artists put a canvas on an easel or hang it on the wall. Not Jackson. He spreads his out like a sheet, smoothing it flat with his large hands. He wants his paintings to be big, big as the sky out west, where he grew up, flat as the marshland behind the house. Sunlight pokes through cracks in the boards, and flies buzz in the dusty studio air. Sliding doors rattle on their frames. He sits, silent, on the floor, staring at the blank canvas. Some artists cover the canvas with a base coat of white paint. Not Jackson. He wants the paint to soak into the surface, leaving bare patches peeking through the stains of color. Some painters use oil paint or watercolor. Not Jackson. He'll use ordinary house paint from the hardware store to make this painting. Some artists paint pictures of flowers or people or landscapes. Not Jackson. He expresses his thoughts and feelings directly on the canvas, calling it energy and motion made visible. And still he sits, surrounded by the cans of enamel, brushes stiff with dried paint, knife, sticks, a spatula, and canvases, waiting. The next afternoon, Jackson prowls around the canvas studying his work, but he doesn't pick up a brush. Instead, he walks the beach past the sandy marshes and the tall spartina grass that waves in the breeze. He spends hours sitting on the grassy dune watching the gulls. At last he stands. He chooses a stick and dips it into a can of syrupy paint. Slowly he circles the canvas, stepping around the edges, straddling the corners. Black lines from a tangled web. Now he chooses a brush, working toward the middle. Sprays of color, tan, teal, yellow, and white. An athlete with a paintbrush, he uses his whole body to make the painting. Layers build with each gesture, new colors emerging, blending and disappearing into the wet surface. He swoops and leaps like a dancer, paint trailing from a brush that doesn't touch the canvas. I want to make a longer and longer line. I want to keep it going. Hours go by like minutes. Suddenly he feels exhausted, used up, his inspiration gone. Things get in the way of the flow like roots blocking a soil line. He puts down the brush and goes into the house to help make supper, his mind filled with thoughts about the wet painting back on the studio floor. In the barn, the layers of paint dry. Almost a week passes before he dips a brush and begins his dance. What is he thinking? Does he see a sunlit beach, the pattern of waves, the interlacing branches of the trees, the lush summer grass outside his studio? I don't know where my pictures come from. They just come. And the paint flows. Like the Native American sand painters he saw as a boy out west, he moves around the canvas, coaxing the paint into loops and curves. On the floor, I am much more at ease. I can walk around it, work from the four sides, be in the painting. Fireworks splatter of rosy pink, twisting ropes of white, spangles of silver, a lavender glow where pink and blue-black meet. Jackson listens to jazz recordings in the evenings. He likes musicians who improvise, inventing their own melodies as they play. While he paints, the notes spin over and over in his memory. Swish and swish again. The rhythm of the brush matches the rhythm of the music. If a penny fell out of his pocket, he would leave it. An insect lands in the wet paint, and there it stays. Nails and tacks become part of the texture. He caresses the surface with sticky, paint-stained hands. One, then two handprints across the canvas. His eyes move up and down, back and forth with light steps. He follows the sweep of his brush. He stops and a pool of paint pauses. Paint, paint, and more paint, dripping, pouring, flinging. The paint has a life of its own. I try to let it come through. Again, he stops. He climbs a ladder to look down at the whole canvas. Every muscle aches, but his eyes, his mind, and his heart know the painting is finished. Some people will be shocked when they see what he has created. Some angry, some confused, some excited, some filled with a happiness they can hardly explain. But everyone will agree. Jackson Pollock is doing something original, painting in a way that no one has ever seen before. For the next few days, he and his wife Lee plant the vegetable garden. They drive into town in their Model A Ford. He digs for clams on the beach. On the weekend, friends drop by for a party. It will take another week for the thick paint to dry. Then Jackson and Lee will tack the canvas to the studio wall. Jackson sits, silent, staring at the blank canvas spread on the floor of the barn, waiting. Soon he will dip his brush in a can of paint, lifting it high in the air to begin again. Jackson Pollock, 1912 to 1956. Jackson Pollock was a man of few words, a big man with a rough-and-tumble cowboy style. He was born in Cody, Wyoming, the youngest of 5 brothers. Hard times kept his family on the move to Arizona, then California, always looking for better opportunities. Finally, his mother insisted that they settle in Los Angeles, where she hoped a good education would help her sons succeed in life. In high school, Jackson liked English and art, but he was too rebellious to be a good student. He was expelled twice, the second time for throwing punches at the football coach. After that, he wouldn't be allowed to graduate, though his art teacher convinced the school to let him come back for his drawing and sculpture classes. He moved to New York in 1930 to study with the artist Thomas Hart Benton, who did energetic paintings of American life. Benton's use of rhythmic lines to show movement all over the canvas influenced the way Jackson painted. Later, Jackson said that Benton, a realist painter who disapproved of abstract art, was a good artist to react against. During the Great Depression in 1930s, after the stock market had crashed and many people had lost their jobs, Jackson worked for a government-sponsored program that was part of the WPA, Works Progress Administration. Artists were hired to paint pictures and murals for government buildings. He didn't earn much money, but he was used to being poor. and it was an exciting time to be part of New York's art community. He began experimenting, painting images from myths and his dreams, and spent hours in museums looking at artworks from Native American and Pacific Rim cultures. In 1941, the Museum of Modern Art invited Navajo medicine men to give demonstrations of their sand painting, which serves a religious and ceremonial functions for the tribe. The artist poured colored sands and patterns on the floor, each painting created anew and then destroyed. He studied them closely. Before long, his canvases with thick layers of painting veiling shapes and the figures underneath started to attract attention. In 1945, Jackson married Lee Krasner, who was also a painter. Searching for a quieter life away from the competitive New York art scene, the couple moved to a Long Island village called Springs. Their new home was a rundown rural clapboard house. Lee said the house was heated with coal stoves with no hot water. Not until 1949, when the Museum of Modern Art had brought a second painting, did we call Dick Talmadge, the plumber up the road, to have heat and hot water put in. A small barn on the property was moved and turned into Jackson's studio. There, in the winter of 1947, inspired by the light and marshy landscape, he spread his canvas on the floor and began doing his most famous paintings, large works called abstractions because they have no recognizable images. He called his paintings energy and motion made visible. When these works were first shown in a New York gallery in 1948, they turned the art world upside down. When some reviewers called him the best painter in America, and others said his work looked like a plate of baked macaroni. Life magazine wrote an article presenting him as a new American rebel. People flocked to see his next exhibition because of the way Jackson moved around the canvas, pouring painting from a brush or a stick. His artwork was labeled drip painting or action painting, thus the nickname Action Jackson. He and other abstract painters of his generation are called abstract expressionists. During the summer of 1950, Jackson painted some of his greatest works. After number 1, 1950, Lavender Mist was finished, he began work on number 31, 1951. Sometime early that summer, a photographer named Hans Namuth received permission from Lee and Jackson to photograph the artist in his studio. For the next few months, Namuth took many photographs, including those of Jackson working on the painting that would be called Autumn Rhythm. Namuth still photographs and a 20-minute film he made from a unique record of the way the artist worked. By 1951, Jackson was moving away from his so-called drip paintings. Though he still painted in that style occasionally, shapes from nature, animals, and people began to reappear in his work. He was famous now, but he told friends that all the attention made him feel like a clam without a shell. Jackson struggled with alcoholism and depression for most of his adult life. When he was sober, he painted well. But when he was drinking, he felt discouraged and temperamental. His career was cut short by a fatal car crash in 1956. He died at age 44. Due to his groundbreaking paintings and those of other abstract expressionists, New York became the center of the art world, and a new American art was born. The end.